Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
I wouldn't say it was the most comfortable or enjoyable experience. I used to get horrendous nerves. I was very self-defeating. Used to beat myself up a lot. Nothing was ever good enough. So I actually think there's a fine line between sort of thriving and using it to succeed versus it being a sort of trap. And when I look back at my sports career, I probably went on the wrong side of that a fair bit. Rather than actually using it to improve myself and take action to get better, it sort of kept me stuck, I would say.
Today I'm talking to Calum Clark, ex-international Rugby Union player turned high-performance psychologist. Having started on the rugby trail aged just 15, Calum turned professional 3 years later and spent 14 years playing at the highest level. He turned up for 3 different Premiership clubs as well as England, and in that time he experienced the highs of winning 3 Premiership titles, 2 European Cups, and the lows of career-threatening injuries, disciplinary setbacks, and various off-field issues. Realising there was a lack of professional support, guidance and expertise to help navigate such things, he completed the first of 2 Psychology MScs alongside the final years of his playing career. He then became head of player development and Wellbeing at Saracens before going on to become their head of psychological performance, with a number of his clients, including Ben Earl, going on to excel at the 2023 Rugby World Cup in France. In our conversation, Calum shares the importance of drilling as an individual and as a team, how we all need a North Star, and which pressure was worse, playing for England or finishing his psychology thesis. Calum, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to speak to me on Better Under Pressure. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So much to dig into today. When do you recognise first feeling pressure?
I think probably from my first involvement in sport as a kid. That always felt like where there was a pressure to perform. Actually, also, when I think about it in the classroom as well. So like pressure to do well in school, pressure to be good at academia as well. So actually when I think about it now, like being at primary school and under pressure to do exams and stuff like that. But then also, like sport in particular from a young age, whether it was swimming, football, rugby, being in that arena was where pressure really came into my life, I would say.
How did you know that it was pressure?
I guess you just feel it. It's like a felt sense of a need to deliver, a pressure on myself, like a want and a desire for myself to succeed and achieve. And then also I think as well, like competing against others. So there's other people around you and you're in the same race or you're playing the same game or you're studying for the same exam. And I think that social pressure has always been quite a big part of where I felt pressure in comparison to others, I would say.
And would you say that it raised your game? So, part of the inquiry here is talking about and exploring people's relationship with pressure. And it sounds as you're talking now that in a way you responded to it in a way that allowed you to perform. Am I guessing that? Or, has that always been the case that for you,
No.
Pressure has been this element that's allowed you to perform better?
I think it has. I think my competitive nature has definitely, that pressure has brought that out of me. I wouldn't say it was the most comfortable or enjoyable experience. I used to get horrendous nerves. I was very self-defeating, used to beat myself up a lot and nothing was ever good enough. So I actually think there's a fine line between sort of thriving and using it to succeed versus it being a sort of trap. And I think when I look back at my sports career, I probably went on the wrong side of that a fair bit, rather than actually using it to improve myself and take action to get better. I think it sort of kept me stuck, I would say.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about that. How did that make you feel? I mean, how did it? Yeah, how did it? You used the word trap. I think that's fascinating. How did it make you feel stuck or trapped? And what did you do to shift that? Because you became and still are a really highly successful sportsman. So you must have done something with that relationship at some point.
I think, for example, when I was playing team sports, when I was playing professional rugby, one of the things I struggled with was selection. So like, am I getting in the team this week? Am I playing in this game? And I probably wasn't quite good enough as a player for my position to be dead cert in the beginning. Like I was playing in Northampton, and I was an important part of the squad. But there was always that feeling of like, there's lots of other good players here. Am I going to get selected? So, and I think for a long time, that was just carried on. That was a worry that just perpetuated, and a sort of a pattern and a narrative that just went round and round until Northampton played in the Premiership final in 2014, and I got picked to start the game. And every one of my teammates that started that game went on tour with their country in the summer, and I was the only one that didn't. And that was a moment of, I've got to change something here. And I kind of made a decision and tried to made a significant change in what I was doing. And that then, off the back of that, I had the best season of my life and managed to get my only cap at the end of it for England. So there was, I think in the beginning, it was very much just, this is just how it is, and I'm just going to sit here and wait until the world changed. And then I think taking action, then that selection became less and less important, because I sort of improved my performance to a level where actually I was more likely to be in the team. Yeah.
Oh, I really would love us to go in a little bit deeper on that process, because I speak to a lot of people where they feel the pressure, and like that moment where you said, right, I've got to make a different choice here. How do you do that? Because how do you suddenly feel, right, this just isn't working for me in this particular shape or this form. I need to stop and I need to rethink it. Can you talk about that a bit, Calum, and break it down for us?
Yeah. So obviously the feeling was uncomfortable. I was disappointed. I was suffering and looking around going, oh, I'd love to be going on tour with my country, but I'm not. And that was a difficult thing to come to terms with. And I sort of came back into pre-season that year, and I set myself a single goal. So it was just one thing I was going to focus on, but it was aligned with my strengths and what I felt it was a realistic thing that would elevate my game. And that was just to be as fit as I possibly could, physically fit as I possibly could. And having that singular focus and actually doing things for myself, by myself and for myself, out of my own decision making, not waiting to be told, not doing what everyone else does. But like there was this one thing that I was like, I'm actually going to go above and beyond the norm here. And that was the thing that gave me purpose and gave me more than just what was that normal routine and cycle that I was in. I had to break out of it, and that was the way for me. So it was something that was aligned with, when I looked at what I was actually good at and what my strengths were, that was a natural sort of strength, and just thought, well, I'm going to maximize this and see where it takes me. And then like align what I was doing daily and weekly to make sure that I was in line with that sort of intention. That was kind of the process, but it just sort of happened organically, really, and it just came to me.
Yeah, but you know what? The thing that really stands out for that is that one singular focus to decide. I think there's the sense of overwhelm when everyone else is doing something and you've not been chosen, and the emotions that kicks off, and how you can see. I mean, I can feel it just as you're talking, how that can completely swamp you. And I know it can swamp me, and it can swamp people that we work with, that feeling of not having control. in a system that you're being chosen or not chosen, or you're relying on other people's decisions, can feel incredibly disempowering. And that exists in systems of work and organizations as well. But I think when that whole idea of being picked, how can you grab hold of the things that you can control in a system where actually ultimately the decision lies with someone else?
Yeah, that was it. And it was looking at what was within my sphere of responsibility, and taking hold of something that I thought would get me a lot of value back for the investment. And it was something that, it really did help me elevate my overall performance. So I think typically, and I work with players now, and they're in these situations where they're trying to establish themselves as like first choice, or they're trying to get in their international team and stay there and play well there. And it's a constant process of, in order for you to do that, you've got to focus on the underlying performance that you're putting out and making sure that that's consistent and it's at a level that warrants consistent selection. And I think I spent a lot of my career focusing on what was happening outside, or this coach doesn't like me, or just politics or whatever. And actually the time when I went, look, like, it's really time to look at what you're doing, made a decision, stuck to it, had the perseverance to see it through. That's when the external started to change for me, but it had to start here first.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. And I think how has that morphed for you as you've got older, and now that you've left the game and you're working on new things? I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting things around people who have professional sports careers, is that it comes to a point where you have to step away from it. And then you almost have to reinvent yourself, don't you? So how have you taken that lesson from what you did there to really excel in your performance into this new phase of your life?
Yeah, I think it's been a journey the last few years, that's for sure. And I started studying my psychology degrees and whatnot towards the end of my career. And that singular focus helped me transition. Like, it was when everything else was falling apart around me, I knew that if I kept studying and kept working towards qualifying and kept upskilling myself in this area, that someday it would pay back. That was the sort of one constant throughout all of that. Transitioned out of the game, and really grateful to Saracens, because I finished playing there and they gave me an opportunity to start practicing what I was learning and studying with my psychology at the club. And I had 2 years there, which again was another sort of constant throughout the transitional period. So the studying and Saracens, having a place to go every day and apply it. So again, having that one focus and going, like, I believe deep down this is where my future lies in it through this process. And committing to it and sticking to it, even when it was, awful at times, like really, really took it out of me, the studying and trying to manage that transition in life and everything. So, but again, like I say, having that singular focus really helped.
What personal habits do you have, Calum, that allows you to stick to that singular focus?
It's something I'm trying to establish at the moment. I think you go from being institutionalized in professional sport as a player, getting told everything, getting told what to do, when to do it. Largely it's given to you, to then not being a player anymore, but in the same organization, which was a really strange period of time, because I'm like, I still feel like I'm a player, but I'm not. And so I was kind of still in this rhythm. And then I left 6 months ago out of sort of organizational sport, if you like. And it's been a real process of trying to establish what those habits look like. Because, during that transitional period, took some wrong turns and went down some paths that weren't so helpful and healthy. But I think I'm slowly getting back and course correcting back to what is right now. And I think a big thing for me actually that's been different is managing my energy and my what I'm giving, because when in professional sport you're on the field and it's very bang, short, sharp, you go home, you rest, you recover for the next day. Whereas what I'm doing now there's always stuff to do, and you
Yeah.
can't. And like, it's been a real humbling process of like, I wake up on a Monday and I go, right, I'm going to do 10 things today. Get to the end of Monday and you're like, whoa. And so it's actually being more intentional and deliberate and breaking things down and understanding that I'm playing a longer game here, not well, I've got to prepare for the game at the weekend and got to charge all amazing. It's been a humbling process, and just trying to slow down a little bit, but be more intentional about looking forward, planning things, putting things in the diary that are like I want to achieve this by the end of the week, but I'm not going to try and do it all on a Monday, which was essentially what I was trying to do. So yeah, just being a lot more conscious and considered about my time, and then understanding how much energy each thing's going to take out of me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll have a session with a client and it's like, I'm so like buzzing from it and excited by it. I have to like bring myself down and calm myself down and go for a walk or something, or go for a run, because it gives me a lot back, and it makes all the studying and everything worth it. So to be honest, in answer to your question, it's still something I'm figuring out, but there's lots of things that I'm starting to understand will be helpful.
Yeah. And also what you're describing there is what I would call performance energy, the energy you get from performance, but there's you've distinguished two types. When you play a game, you obviously feel incredible after the game, hopefully. But even if you haven't won, there's a surge of extreme energy output that you've been spending. And now what you're describing is that a different type of performance energy. When you have a great client and you come out of that session, it feels still like performance energy, but two different breeds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's like the come down off that, you're sitting with someone, it's like when it's working, and you've reached them in some way, and then it's like, whoa, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to spend my life doing, and it's really energizing, but almost too much. It's almost uncomfortable sometimes. You're like, oh man, I just need to simmer down.
Yeah, and I mean that whole idea of managing your state, because you may have another client in an hour's time, or how do you recover in a slightly different way from how you might recover from a game?
Yeah.
I often talk about how we tend to pay more attention to charging our devices than we do to charging ourselves. The fear of our phone running out of charge seems to jump us into very intentional behaviour to make sure that doesn't happen. Ironically, we're not quite so intentional with our own recharge, making sure we have a full battery. But even when we are deliberate about making sure we have enough fuel in our tanks, we need to take care of how we use it. And this is what Calum is reminding me of here. The importance of becoming more aware of what John Amici calls energy expensive choices, the ones we make every day without even thinking. These energy expensive choices can take many forms. That unhelpful internal dialogue we run about a person, that meeting that we begrudge attending, that decision that we felt we weren't even involved in, or that person who wants to pick our brains about something and before we know it, we've given away an hour. They can all eat up our precious resource that could be saved for something much more deserving. As Calum speaks about transitioning away from professional sport, where many decisions were made for him, he reminds me of the importance of knowing your point of focus, making sure that your energy lines up behind that. This is front of mind for me right now, actually, as I've just run my first retreat, Legacy Moves, with leaders who are all making a transition into something bigger or different. And we focused a lot on the integral relationship between what I'm calling spirit and discipline. There's real power in this dynamic duo, particularly when we're playing a longer game. That feeling Calum has just shared, where he coached a player and the buzz he felt afterwards, where he felt he just had to calm down, that made all the hard work and study for his degrees worth it. This is his connection to purpose and spirit. When we're involved with something that has meaning, bigger than us, it's palpable, and it also needs discipline to honour it. By this I mean our habits, our daily choices, the discipline to focus on what really matters, to be who we really want. That is a practice. So, if you're listening to this and you're feeling under pressure because you know that you're leaking your precious energy on things, people, problems, issues that really don't deserve it, and you want to create more meaningful impact by becoming more intentional, or like Calum, you're making a leap from the familiar into something unknown, and although it feels a little bit scary, you know that it will ultimately light you up and allow you to be more of who you are, then start here. Focus on one thing that ignites the spirit of why it matters to you. You know, a memory or a vision or an experience. And begin experimenting with what discipline is required to help you honour and build it. Ask yourself what discipline even means to you. For me, for example, it's about backing myself with intention. What daily habit or ritual will fire up your energy to keep that singular focus on what really matters to you and who you are becoming? How does pressure turn up for you now then, Calum? How do you use it when it's not quite so win or lose?
I still feel a sense of pressure to be professional and deliver for the people I'm working with. So it's a different kind of pressure, but in some ways it's similar. Like, it forces me to be as professional as I can. It forces me to plan ahead and think, right, I've got a session with this person, and am I in the right place to deliver? If I'm rushing around and sitting down last minute as I'm about to start the session, like, is that really doing the whole situation justice? So it's a different pressure, but it's forcing me into healthier and better habits and more conscious planning, more thinking ahead. But it's enjoyable as well. Like, it's purposeful. It feels like it's the right type of pressure, and it's nudging me to do the right things in my life, rather than something that overwhelms me or is something that I want to necessarily escape from. I actually feel like it's helping me, benefiting me.
Yeah. What is the worst pressure that you have ever faced, Calum?
I think the worst pressure was probably getting my final thesis finished for the end of my studies. Like, it was at a time in my life where I had all sorts going on, and just having that hanging over me, and it'd been at the end of sort of like a 4-year studying period, and it was like the final thing, and you're that close, but you're like so far away at the same time. Yes. And just having to, with everything else that I was going through, having to sit down and push that out of me, and it was the culmination of sort of 4 years of studying this final piece of work. And I just remember, like, I was driving myself mad. And I just remember one day I was like, I'm not leaving this flat until I've written this. I just had this moment where I just sat down on the computer and just wrote 2 paragraphs, and it basically summarized everything I was trying to say in 2 paragraphs. I was like, that's it. That's the message. And then once I'd done that, it was easy then. I could structure everything, and it all made sense, and it was a story I was telling. But what it took to get there, the analogy I use is like a storm cloud. Like, the energy's building, and then it needs a certain amount of energy before the lightning strikes and you actually get the point down. That build-up was awful, because, you know, you've got a deadline looming, and it's culmination of all this studying and this hard work, and it's like so important for your future and what you're going to do afterwards. And that was a tough time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine. I mean, so many of us had these, like, it's the deadline, isn't it? And it sits in your head for so long, and it's a major thing that needs to come out of you. But setting up those conditions, I like that idea of just putting it all down and then knowing, okay, we all have to find our own way, don't we? Of being able to attack something and not be overtaken by the pressure of getting something done by a date. That's great. And the other thing I'm really curious about, Calum, and it's something that we actually don't talk about a lot here, but I think it's relevant with your background, is the pressure of external opinion. So I know that with sport, that's, you know, And also actually in the performing arts, in theatre, you know, I've got friends who are actors who say, if you believe the good reviews, you've got to believe the bad ones. So therefore I don't read any. But how do you protect yourself, and how would you, what do you think is important when you're coaching, you know, sportsmen and women that you now do as well? How do you help people manage that external pressure and that external opinion that can impact your performance or your sense of who you are?
Yeah, that's a really great question, given kind of I made a lot of mistakes in my career and probably didn't have the best reputation in the game. So I always felt, it was something that quite early on in my career, I knew I couldn't engage with and couldn't really, it was something that it was going to be difficult to escape or change. And it's still, I imagine, still now in certain people's minds. And I totally understand the reasons why. I think.
Well, come on, Calum, you're going to have to talk about what is this reputation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had disciplinary issues on the field, and you know, got in trouble, got banned, and it's not something I would ever choose or be proud of. So it's not easy to talk about. However, and so, you know, that kind of was a big part of my experience of playing rugby, that I made those mistakes young, and there was always going to be that angle in conversation, and I totally understand. Like, it's not unusual, or you have to take responsibility for what happened. However, it early on taught me that lesson that you're speaking about there, of you can't afford to get caught up in other people's opinions, whether they're good or bad. You can't just have the good. If you open yourself up to it, you've got to be willing to take the full spectrum. And the reality is, you know, most of the time we're somewhere in the middle. We're human beings trying to do our best. And I think so when I'm working with players now, I'm always trying to help them develop that inner knowing and that inner sense of, I know when I've performed well, I know when I'm going in the right direction, because too much of either one, too much of the positives as bad as too much of the negative stuff. Yeah. You can get stuck thinking that you believe in the hype and you don't have to work hard anymore, and you don't have to progress and make improvements. And that's when, you know, you start falling off and going backwards. Equally, too much of the negative, and you can actually cloud your own judgment of what's going on. So yeah, it's a really tough one. And I imagine I'm grateful that when I was playing and coming through, social media wasn't as big as it is today.
Yeah.
I don't know how I survived, given everything that happened.
It feels quite real to you still.
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's played a big part in my story, obviously, but I guess, and since then I've tried to gone on a journey to kind of unpack it all and try and figure it out and try and make a difference and try and ensure that the work that I'm doing now ensures that people who are in that situation or have the propensity to be, you know, get in that sort of trouble, you can get them earlier and you can ensure that, like, these things don't happen. I guess it's really close to the jugular today, because just yesterday I did a podcast with a guy, and he put a clip of us talking out on social media, which we've spoken about earlier. And we were talking about emotions, and like a lot of my research has been around that and the emotional lives of athletes and how important it is to be more attuned and skilled with them. And he put the clip out on social media, and someone had piped up and given me, you know, like really stuck the knife in and made a comment about the past. And it's probably the first time that's happened for a long time. And it's still very close to the bone, because I feel like I have come a long way and I've tried to move on from sport, and that moment in particular, it'll always be a part of me, which I guess is life. And it's always be something I experienced. However, what I feel like I've tried to do is make it make sense in some bigger story by doing the work I've done and studying and trying to make a difference now in the game in a different way. It's still impactful, obviously.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, but also so real and so important, because so many people are dealing with stuff that, you know, maybe they don't feel fantastically proud of in the past. And also there are some people who are dealing with stuff that actually isn't true, but the press has made up as something. You know, I can think of a client at the moment who's, you know, you Google their name and this story comes up and it wasn't even a true story, but there's no way you can get it off Google. And I think this is a reality for many people. But what's interesting about what you've just shared, Calum, is how do you go on that journey with stuff that you don't necessarily feel proud of, that you've been part of in the past? I mean, that's a fundamental human thing.
Yeah. Well, the fact that I went through those experiences and my career was so extreme, highs and lows, and I went to the depths, like that was dark. In the context of the bigger story, that's enriched me to do what I do now. So I can sit down with a client now, and no matter what they've done, no matter how bad things are, I've probably been there and potentially been there worse. And they feel a sense of like, this guy, I know this guy's been through it, so I can open up and I can talk to them about something that maybe I haven't talked about before. And the amount of times when you're in conversation with a client and they go, I've never said this out loud before, but bam, 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 and they reveal something about themselves, and you're like, oh, great, like that's awesome that you've finally spoken up about this thing you've been fearing your whole life, or whatever it might look like. So as much as it's been challenging, like it does add a lot to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, there's always a lesson, isn't there, in the deepest pain somewhere.
Yeah, the cure for the pain is in the pain.
Yeah, exactly.
Sadly and unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we all have an internal knowing and an internal compass. I feel like we get very disconnected from it, and we get influenced by, rightly so, you know, social and cultural and familial influences. And actually you can get lost a little bit. And I think it's interesting because I do think sometimes I think sports coaching or coaching should lead someone towards that and help them find it and live in it and develop a way of living that keeps them as close to in touch with that inner knowing as possible. And I don't know from my experience how much of sports coaching was aimed towards that end. And I think what I'd like to think the success I've had with the players I've worked with is always about guiding them towards that, not instructing them, not telling them do this, but helping them figure it out for themselves, figure out who they are as a player for themselves. Because when they're out there on the field, when we talk about under pressure, that's where it really gets exposed, like who you are. And I think if you're acting in line with your true nature, when the pressure comes on, you're resourced and you're ready to deliver and work through it. If you're all twisted out of shape trying to be something you're not, then the pressure comes on, it's way more likely you're going to crumble. So yeah, I think it's a slightly different angle. I don't know how much of sports coaching, from what I've experienced, I'm sure there's lots of it out there, but like it's just an interesting, almost like philosophical shift. Like this person has everything they need inside them to be as good as they can be, and my job is to nurture and develop it and make it as strong and as expressed as possible.
Yeah, so you're sort of talking about talent as one, you know, the talent's been spotted, the talent's there, but what's going to allow that talent to really shine or be strong under pressure is someone's ability to also understand who they are in relation to that talent. And what they stand for.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you understand that identity, who am I? As a player, what are my strengths? What am I good at? What areas of the game am I like most impactful in? And then the thing with that is, the great thing about that is when they have that understanding of who they are and they find their edges and they find their identity as a player, their resilience is so great because they know who they are, and if they get knocked off track, they know what they're trying to get back to. And then they're able to train in line with that nature. It follows them everywhere. It's always with them. So it's just, for me, that's a really important start point. You can't perform in a way that's out of line with your true nature. And I think that finding that, staying in charge of it and training in a way that's going to maximize that is a good recipe for success and improvement.
Yeah. What I'm witnessing here, and actually quietly cheering, is the emphasis that Calum's placed on being in support of doing. This is an important distinction. We spend a lot of time on this podcast discussing what we can do, what we can practice, but this is about the practice of being, evolving and becoming more of who we are rather than just standing still. Calum is working with talented players at the top of their game, literally, and he's highlighting the importance and power of knowing who you are. Being prepared to really prioritise the inner, often messy, mixed emotions that rise to the surface, particularly when the stakes are high, and that many of us wish to keep hidden. Some of the most inspiring leaders and high achievers I work with are the ones who are serious about continuing to do the work with and on themselves, and who see this as a vital and integral part of how they show up for others. They prioritise internal curiosity as well as their external performance. These are people who never believe that they're the finished product. They inspire me because they keep returning to check in on their own inner compass, because, as Calum says, they too understand that under pressure, who you are gets exposed. What I witness as an important byproduct of this inner work is their readiness to reveal more of themselves when it feels that it could benefit, support and strengthen others in similar situations. Molly Pearce on the podcast a few weeks ago also shared her experience of the power of this. So if you're interested, it's worth having a listen. When we become disconnected from our bodies, our feelings and our senses, we can, in Calum's words, become twisted and out of shape, expending energy on trying to be something that we're really not. We can always be more than we are right now, but we have to be prepared to look in as well as out. So here's the million-dollar question. What is currently disconnecting you from who you are? Or, for a more forward-focused question, what could you do to connect more to who you are? There's always more to be, however brilliant we are at what we do. When you're playing a team sport like rugby, what do you think is most important about containing the pressure as a team? And I'm thinking also about some of the organisations we work with, Calum, where, there's the sense of a team and a high-performing team, but the pressure is so immense coming in, particularly at the moment, that it only takes one of them to spin off and then they all spin off. What do you think is important from your experience of working as a team under pressure to keep the unit tight in that pressure?
Yes, I think the same thing is true what we're speaking about there with the individual level as a team level. There's got to be a collective sense of identity and enough structure and framework to hold a group of people together, because and then there's got to be almost like a shared sort of thinking about what they're doing. Because if you have one person on their own has an infinite number of choices, 15 people on a rugby team, if they're all making infinite number of choices, like the ability to coordinate and be effective as a team is going to be limited. So there needs to be something to hold them together, a structure, a system. And I think when I was working at Saracens last season, we started to implement a lot of that system and structure in place. And it was amazing to see how when we were down in games, we maybe hadn't performed well, but we were in the game, we had something to fall back to that everyone understood. We trained it every week. We drilled it. We repped it. And it was like when the pressure comes on, boom, we fall back, we perform and we deliver what we've practiced to do. And it was amazing. Like some of the moments last year were incredible where we've had a bit of an iffy game, but we'd slot a last minute drop goal, or we'd score a last minute try and we'd keep the conversion to win, or we'd be down like 20 points with 20 minutes to go and we'd just do the job. It was amazing to watch and be a part of last year. So to go back to your question, I think you've got to have a collective framework that holds people together in those moments and gives them something to go back to, because when the pressure comes on, you'll fall back to what's habitual and normal for you. And so those habits have to be high performing enough to get through and deliver despite the pressure.
Yeah. So what might one of those things, if we made it really specific, what might one of those drills or those team commitments be when a moment of pressure's on for the team? Can you sort of bring that alive just with a specific example?
We can go quite technical in a rugby sense.
Okay.
Like when we had the ball in attack, we had a very specific structure, the way that we would structure where we were stood on the field. And we had a very specific way of moving and running that we drilled and replicated over and over again, so that it was just became sort of automatic that when we'd get the ball, we'd drop into these places, we'd play through what we'd practiced, and we'd end up creating opportunities to score tries from.
Yeah.
So it was like an embedded set of habits, and it was almost like we trained it so much that it just became subconscious.
Yes.
It's having systems and processes in place that, like, okay, when the pressure comes on, we go through this sort of process, we follow this process of events that we know is going to lead to success.
Yeah.
And everyone understanding what each thing means and why it's important.
I mean, I love this because it's so embedded in any high performing activity. Actually, you know, if you think about crisis teams in hospitals, you know, people come in. There's a you don't have time to talk about it. Everyone knows, and something kicks in. It's something something kicks in under the pressure. And you know, in my world of theatre and performance, you know, you're upping the pressure in every single rehearsal up to the time of performance, so that, you know, you can be able to manage everything when the audience is in front of you. You incrementally rise the moments of pressure. You take the book away, you put people under lights, you block it, you know, you do sections and then you run the sections, you know. You do it in the costume, you do it without the props, you do it with the props. You're slowly upping the pressure so that you can convince yourself and the ensemble that you're working with that we've got this. We just recently saw a one-man show in London. Billy Crudup, if anyone's listening to this and it's still on, really worth seeing. But he writes something in the program which resonates with what we're talking about here, where he says, when you're working on stage with people, when things get tough, you can look them in the eyes and you know that you're in this together. We're in this together right now. When you're doing a one-man show or a one-person show, you don't have that. You have yourself on stage and the lights and the audience in front of you. So you have to build a new muscle of complete, which is what you were talking about, that sort of self-reliance. That's that inner core of, I've got this. Despite what happens, I've got this. And it feels like when you talk about sport, and I think it's so resonant for teams in businesses and organizations as well, and families, actually, you know, you need to own your bit, the part that you play, but equally, you need to have some sort of joint pattern that the team understands when the pressure or the uncertainty hits in. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah,
it's great. It's great to hear that, and I think sometimes we fail to borrow from all these different examples that you're sharing and that exist in organizations because we're too busy doing things and getting things through, as opposed to thinking, what are we going to do what happens when? Supposing X says that whole idea of anticipate to mitigate.
Yeah, the thing that came to mind when you're speaking then was even like military. Like,
yes.
I sort of can't speak from experience, but I imagine the kind of like regimented process underneath it all is a massive part of their ability to execute and perform in the moment together, coordinated. You want them not even like really thinking that much. It's all just happening subconsciously because it's already, their bodies are trained to perform the actions. And the same with your theatre example, like you almost want them out there free mentally, because actually what that does is, if there is something that they need to think about and adjust on stage in the moment, they're free to do it.
Absolutely.
Like if they notice something's different in a game of rugby or the fullback's not in position, then they're able to actually use their brain and go, yeah, I'm going to put it there, rather than going like, right, I need to think about where the ball's coming from and is he in the right position and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, it's too much mental activity.
Yeah. And it's high risk.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. And I mean, Simon, you know Simon in our team, and he's taught me and the team so much about that military precision.
Yeah.
That, you know, when you're in a life and death situation, you can't mess about. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Calum. So if there were two pay forwards for anybody listening to this podcast who wants to be better in their version of pressure, what would you offer them? Two things.
Okay, I would say understand where you want to try and get to. What's the aim of, like, what do you want to try and achieve? What's looking forward and what I'm actually aiming for? I think we all need something to go for. And like a kind of North Star to keep us heading in the right direction. And then the second thing would be really honest, critical, and analytical about what you're doing on a daily basis that is going to, like, whether it's serving you reaching that intention or not. Because those habits are going to eventually decide whether you make it or not, and whether you do get there or not. And I think it is a process as well. Is the last thing I would say. Those habits take time to embed. Sometimes you try one thing and it's maybe not right, or it's not helpful, or it's not as useful. So trying to establish and change habits into sort of like a more higher performing version of yourself. And then as the pressure builds, hopefully as you get further down the track, you'll be in position to deal with it and thrive within the pressure.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that review point that you're talking about, that sense of stopping and almost asking yourself, is what I'm doing the most useful thing to do right now? Do you do that now in your new phase, Calum, of, like, when you were talking earlier about, rather than try and do 10 things in a day, I might spread 10 things across a week, but it's always towards the long-term goal. Do you have a way of reviewing with yourself whether you're on, off, or behind, or ahead of your target? What is your review process like?
I think it's something I'm trying to do probably more intuitively rather than explicitly at the moment, and it's something I need to probably do a little bit more explicitly. Have a diary and journal a lot, so kind of reflecting on that. Reflecting on, was that a good week, or did we get it wrong? And just kind of understanding, and then being able to structure things in a way that is actually more aligned with what I've learned from the last week, etc. So. It's an ongoing process.
But I suppose that's something you've learned so hugely from your time in professional sport, is the importance of the review.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because what I don't always think happens enough is the part we spoke about there, where we've got something to aim for. We know what the end looks like, and reviewing based on how we're going to create the future. I think we sometimes, what I've found anyway, reviewing my own games, I would get bogged down in it too much, rather than actually being proactive about, where am I going? What was useful about that? And am I going to take it with me? Or am I going to leave it behind? Am I going to change it, etc.? There wasn't enough of the long-term view. It was very much like next week, reactive. That was bad this week, so I'm going to do some practice on it this week, and then there was never like a longer term establishment of habits. Yeah, that's something I think is really important.
I do too. And it reminds me of what's going on for many teams that we're working with at the moment, is how do you keep holding your nerve against the long-term goal, as opposed to being influenced. It's that whole dance, isn't it, that everyone's having to do right now, is how do we flex and be adaptable because things are moving so fast, and at the same time keep having the long-term goal that you're in service to. And I think that's increasingly difficult and tough for people right now.
That's a constant theme I'm finding with the players I work with, is to pull them back day in, day out, because they're just in the grind. They've just finished a session, they're knackered, they've got all these things going, whoa, step back, like, where were we 2 years ago? Right, we've come a long way. And then where are we going to go? What are we looking to do? How is your day-to-day aligning with it? And then once we get a little bit more of that in, like, a plan in place, then they can dive back in, get stuck in, bam, bam, bam. But that perspective and that change in view is really, really helpful and important.
Yes. And having someone to really force you to take that moment, I think, is increasingly important. Yeah, stop. Yeah, grab them by the scruff of their neck and pull them out.
You're miserable, and you're not enjoying this. Like you've done so well. Like, let's have a second before we dive back in and get stuck in again. So
yeah. Calum, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.